So I dropped the link to the YouTube live stream page in chat. So again, there's a chat there as well. So just keep an eye on that.
Okay.
And again, we usually see maybe about 10, 12 people over there as well while the event's going. So.
Okay, sounds great. So I would say I would just wait like 5 more minutes and then I would start.
So I'm gonna make you host. Chat there as well, so just keep an eye on that.
Okay.
And again, we usually see maybe about 10, 12 people over there as well. So you're now host. So I'll need to drop in maybe about 5-10 minutes, but I'll hang on for a minute to see if there's any issues or anything, but you should have full access now.
So in the meantime, let me just share my screen. So I think I would say I would slowly start, and I would basically start with a small introduction. So if anybody joins or joining a little bit later on, then they do not miss practically the technical content. So basically, this is Hyperledger Budapest. We did almost a year break due to several reasons. I mean, mostly, this year was the pandemic that blocked us pretty much. But we are basically relaunching Hyperledger Budapest. It looks that way that it's Budapest. It's in Hungary. We used to have and we still have a pretty good technical community and audience as well for blockchains, for different blockchain technologies. Hyperledger is, not Hyperledger, but consortium blockchain is certainly not the major focus, but still there's a huge interest basically for consortium blockchain technologies as well. What we usually do on an open community basis is to give like mostly technical presentations. Sometimes we invite speakers from business area as well. But again, as I mentioned, so basically Hungary is more stronger in terms of technical competence and audience, and perhaps not so much on use cases. But anyway, this is an open community. So if you feel like joining us, or if you have an interest for making presentations on any Hyperledger technologies or use cases, then feel free just to contact me, and then we can likely negotiate and schedule something. So what I'm gonna do today is basically do a little bit more technical presentations on Hyperledger Fabric, and especially Hyperledger Fabric Java programming. It's gonna be both chain code programming and basically some client programming as well. It will be a high-level overview. with some real code examples as well. So expect some coding as well. I will have some slides as a general overview, both from Hyperledger Fabric and from the chain code and Java programming of Hyperledger Fabric. So what I'm gonna do is somehow keep switching between the slides and between the coding examples. So practically, I will just iterate a couple of slides, and then I just plunge into the code details, and vice versa. So basically, I mean, the idea was for this presentation that you used to have one very great tool that was Hyperledger Composer, which was mainly for like business analysts doing something very fast on a Hyperledger Fabric or Hyperledger basis. And unfortunately, I mean, this tool is not available anymore. I mean, it's still available if you want it, but you can't really use it in integration with the newest Hyperledger Fabric releases. So the idea was, if it's possible to do something similar in terms of the native Hyperledger Fabric programming, like chain code and client. And well, unfortunately, it's not so easy, but I do what you can do pretty fast and in an easy way. So this was basically the introduction. So I'm not quite sure if people are still joining, or if you have any questions related to the Budapest community or to Hyperledger generally. If so, I can try to answer. So if so, then one way is just putting in the chat. The other way is to put into the YouTube channel, which I try to open parallelly. Yeah. So I guess I see pretty much. The other way is to put into the YouTube channel, which I try to open parallelly. Yeah. So one question is, I mean, all the content will be recorded as far as I know, and the slides and the presentations and the code fragments as well will be checked in practically to GitHub, and I will share them. So yeah. So then let me start basically with the presentation and with some of the technical content. And let me be sure that I'm still sharing my screen. Awesome. So basically, I'm going to start with Fabric development. We will see how exactly Hyperledger Fabric, which components Hyperledger Fabric has. But basically, I will start from a more on a little bit software developer perspective. So let me imagine you want to do something with Hyperledger Fabric. This something might be even for a proof of work application or proof of concept application. It might be something as a small demonstration as well. It can actually be something as a full-scale project as well. But anyway, if you want to start with Hyperledger Fabric development, you should consider basically three major blocks, three building blocks. Building blocks in terms of programming experience and in terms of, I mean, release process as well. So first, what you have in the middle, that's Hyperledger Fabric. It's basically a lot of containerized infrastructure. So first, I mean, independently, if you just want to do some kind of a demo, or if you want to do something as a full-scale project, you need practically developers or people with experience with containerized infrastructure. This containerized infrastructure is the first run Docker. So what I'm going to show is basically just very simple scripts. But if you want to in a more serious way, then you need competence with Docker. It might be even Kubernetes or OpenShift as well. And we get some bash scripts basically as well. So setting up the whole Hyperledger Fabric infrastructure requires some competence in containerized infrastructure, unfortunately. And there are two side tasks here. One is basically chaincode. Chaincode is basically the smart contract of Hyperledger Fabric. It can be regarded as kind of a small component that runs inside Hyperledger Fabric. And there are three languages that you can implement chaincode with. One is Java, second one is JavaScript, and the third one is Go. So these are not really, anything you want to write stuffs, but basically chaincode is a very limited container with very limited programming model and possible calls. So it's really something special, not full-scale Java, JavaScript, or Go application. So that's chaincode. And there's another programming task. It's your client application. So you need to have your client. Your client looks that way, basically. If you want to communicate with the Hyperledger Fabric network, it has some special gRPC communication. So what you usually don't want to do is that you implement this gRPC communication from scratch, but rather what you do is that there's an SDK by Hyperledger Fabric, which helps you this kind of a development. So practically this SDK implements all of the gRPC communication, what's available here. And then basically you can do it in an easy and fast way, setting up your client application. So the point is, usually you could say you could theoretically program in any programming language your client application, but the point is that your SDK is available in Java, JavaScript, and perhaps Go again. Go is not so much a favorite language here, so it's rather Java and JavaScript. So if you want to use or implement your client application without much effort, then you should use actually the official SDK, so basically Java and JavaScript, and a little bit Go that is supported. So that's basically our Fabric development roadmap. It's a little bit of questions. So, I mean, if you just consider the middle, you can't avoid having like Docker or containerized infrastructure specialist or know-how a little bit. If you consider like chaincode and client application, I mean, you can choose your programming language. So one way of choosing is like saying that, hey, we got some Java developers, so we write both chaincode and client application in Java because that's the competence what we have. That's one way of doing things. The second one, which is typical, is that you get one developer for chaincode and a totally different developer for your client application. So like usually if your client application is in JavaScript, is in Node.js, then you say that, hey, then let me write our client application in JavaScript. And then the chaincode. So, I mean, I personally don't like writing smart contract in JavaScript because the language might be not so, efficient in terms of security. So one way of solving this problem is like write your chaincode in Go. Basically, some of the programmers in blockchain space have very good Go competence. So like you get one programmer for chaincode for Go, you get the rest of your application in Node.js in JavaScript, and you get some Dockerized containerized infrastructure. That's a second way of doing things. So let me stop here a little bit the technical presentation, and let me just show some demonstration. So if you want to basically install a full Hyperledger Fabric form, you get some. So there's an official way of installing it. It looks that way that with a certain commands, the full farm is downloaded with a lot of sample applications and with practically all of your Docker images that you want to use. I do not install it at the moment, but I previously installed it. So after successful installation, what you get is a folder which is called Fabric samples. It is not necessary to use your Fabric samples, but the point is, so I always say that if you want to do some Hyperledger Fabric development, the easiest way of doing is to start from things that are working. If you want to start everything from scratch, on the one hand, you need a lot of expertise, you need a lot of competence, and yeah, so it's gonna be a long and sometimes boring process as well. If you want to do it in a fast way, like prototyping, for instance, or because you do not have so much Hyperledger Fabric experience, the easiest way is to start with Fabric samples. And again, so if you install the whole environment, the whole Hyperledger Fabric, then these Fabric samples will be installed as well. Anyway, just one comment, so you can find basically Fabric samples as a GitHub repository as well, Fabric samples. So if you need like further information, you find everything in GitHub. This is actually an open source project. I just skipped the introduction. I focus more on like doing something live, but basically the whole project is open source. You find practically everything on GitHub, including this Fabric samples part as well. So what I'm gonna do now, before plunging into a more theoretical stuff, is that I will start a Hyperledger Fabric network. First, I have to basically stop my running Hyperledger Fabric network. Just one more comment. So if you expect something similar that you saw practically in Hyperledger Composer, like doing things in an easy way, then you can practically forget it. So this is a very much technical stuff of doing things. So basically, you need to do a lot of things with a command prompt, basically. And at the end, you can just call commands with the help of a command prompt application. So it's not so fancy and not so spectacular for the first run. There's a lot of implementation and a lot of like technical stuff inside. So let me just start basically a Hyperledger Fabric network. It looks that way, that under your Fabric samples, which is again, which is installed as you install Hyperledger Fabric, there are a couple of basically examples that are prepared. Let me just zoom in a little bit. So if you just go inside the folder, you see a lot of things. And then what I'm gonna experiment with is the test network. So one way of starting like a simple Hyperledger Fabric is to go to the test network folder. And here there's a network command bash script, which if I start, then there are a couple of things that I can give as a parameter. And let me just show one fully functioning parameter set. So what I'm gonna do, I'm going to bring up a Hyperledger Fabric network with creating a channel called my channel and a couple of certificate authorities. That's what I'm gonna do. And I will explain just in a second what this create channel, and certificate authority means. But if I just give a command, it looks that way, that it brings up my Hyperledger Fabric network. So again, if you still remember the first slide, we are in the middle basically. We are with Docker and bash scripts, and what we are doing is we start our first Hyperledger Fabric network. There's still not much programming. I mean, there's an example chaincode as well, which I'm just going more in the details. Basically, this is the bash script, this is the Docker files that I'm basically starting at the moment. So let me just have 1 second. It takes a while, but it succeeded. So if there's no like a big fancy error message at the end, then everything is working. And what you can do is to check with the Docker command if your containers has been started. And what we can see at the moment that we get like something as peers, we get something as an orderer, and we get a couple of certificate authorities. Okay. So I'm quite sure how much you're familiar with these words, but I prepared a slide as well. So basically, what we have in Hyperledger Fabric, we get two views. And so again, I'm in the middle, basically. I'm with the Hyperledger containerized infrastructure, which you saw running with Dockers, and you can do it with Kubernetes as well. It's a little bit more complicated with OpenShift, but manageable. So concentrating in the middle, we get like two views. One is a physical architecture, and the other one is the logical architecture. So what you saw here basically with these Docker components is your physical architecture. And your physical architecture looks that way, that you get many different components. These are Docker components. You get like an ordering service in the middle that might behave, so that might have one component or several components as well, but it is responsible to put the transactions on a block and create a new block in order, in a way that double spending is avoided. So ordering service does nothing, just creates a new block practically. And then you get something as peers. Peer work in a way that it has several functionality. One functionality is that it stores your blockchain. So the whole blockchain is basically here somewhere. There's a database here as well, but surprisingly, your blockchain is not in the database. It is usually in the peer in a file folder. And what peer does, it practically simulates transaction and it writes to the ledger. Okay, so this is peer. You got a separate database as well. The database, again, it's not for the full blockchain, but it's practically just for a part of it. It's usually your state. So your state is the last, the newest block of your blockchain. So it's the state of the world. And that's what's stored in your couch table. And you get something as chain code. Again, chain code is basically your smart contract. It's called smart contract in Hyperledger Fabric. So everything which is your smart contract is here in your chain code container. Okay. And this is again one separate container. And it's something as well as certificate authority. It's not so much visible at the moment, but if I just make it smaller, you find here a certificate authority. So it looks that way, that Hyperledger Fabric is a so-called permission blockchain. Permission blockchain means a couple of things. First, even at the transaction side, not everything for everybody available. So if you just, imagine Ethereum, anybody want to use the Ethereum network can use it without any permission. You just download MetaMask, get some transaction, get some Ether, just drag and roll, and you can do it. So this is a so-called permission blockchain. So it looks that way, that if you're a user of the system, you need to have some permissions to do anything with the network. And these permissions can be configured. So like you can say that I have some administrator permission. I can change something on the infrastructure. You can say that, hey, I get some elevated privileges for one of the application, which is usually one of your chain code. So I can do things differently. And we can say that I got some permissions that I can read out something from the ledger. And we can say that you don't have any permission at all, neither seeing nor creating transactions nor editing anything. So these kind of permissions are administrated by public key infrastructure, by X509 certificates, and certificate authority is responsible for issuing such certificates, these certificates. There's another point which is interesting. I'm not going to go very much into the details because this is a very long story. So this is a permission blockchain, even in the infrastructure sense as well. So from the infrastructure point of view, if you look Ethereum is a permissionless network, both from a user perspective and from the infrastructure perspective as well. So infrastructure means if I want to join the network, I can download my node and I can do it without any permissions in Ethereum. it's not the same with Hyperledger Fabric. In Hyperledger Fabric, if I want to join the network, I need to have kind of a permission from the rest of the system. And this permission is, from a technical point of view, again administrated with kind of a public-private keys. So if I'm a server or if I'm a new peer, and if I want to join the network, I need to have some public-private keys and some certificates again that is issued by a certificate authority. Okay, so it's a little, again, it's a more complicated story, but certificate authority basically issues the certificates that are relevant throughout the network for any kind of authorization practically. So last but not least, we get some client application, and client application wants to communicate with our network with the help of an SDK. This is practically the SDK here. So this is the physical architecture. If you just take a look, we find here some of the components. So like we get one peer, that's a peer 0.org1. We get another peer, that's a peer 0.org2. We get some ordering service, that's the orderer.example.com. We get some certificate authority for orderer, for organization 1 and organization 2. There are many ways of configuring Hyperledger Fabric. So this is one working constellation. You can have like thousands of different setup depending on how many peers, how do you want to have your chain code CouchDB, how many ordering components do you want, how you want to structure your certificates, authorities, and so on and so on. I will go a little bit more in details a little bit later. So you have something as well as the logical architecture. And your logical architecture is, yes, somehow related to this physical one. So in Hyperledger Fabric, you got something as organizations on the logical level. Organization is something that, I mean, you want to build a network between several big companies, then usually these big companies are organizations. We get something for each organization. You can define actually one or two peers. And one of the other important stuff is channel, so-called channel. Channel is a blockchain. So it looks that way that Hyperledger Fabric doesn't give you the opportunity to build up one blockchain, but it gives you the opportunity to build up several totally different blockchains. So you get here like 4 organizations. This is organization 1. It's like, I don't know, Hyperledger organization. This is organization 2. It's, I don't know, World Bank. This is organization 3. It's, I don't know, BMW. So like big companies. Then you can have practically a channel, which is again a separate blockchain. And this blockchain is used just for these 3 organizations, visible just for these 3 organizations, and can be administrated just by 3 organizations. You can have an organization 4 as well. It's like, I don't know, NGO. And then you can set up a totally different blockchain. That's an isolated blockchain. That's an isolated channel between organization 2 and organization 4. And this channel 2 is visible and administrated just by these big organizations. So if we just go back, we can say actually that like the peers has something as an organization. So it is not so much with the scenario, but basically with this scenario, we got 2 organizations, organization 1 and organization 2. And for each organization, there's 1 peer. So there's the peer 0 for organization 1, there's the peer 0 for organization 2. And basically that's all. Ordering service is independent from the organization. And then basically there's certificate authorities as well, 2 certificates authorities for the 2 organizations, and 1 certificate authority for the orderer. And it's not so much visible, but if you still remember, with this command create channel, I created actually a channel as well. So this command creates a channel between organization 1 and organization 2 and configures it without problem. There's one more thing which should be taken care of. That's basically chain code. chain code looks that way, that chain code is your smart contract, and you install your smart contract, your chain code for a channel. So if you have like a business application which has a chain code, which has something code inside, like in Java, then you install it for a specific channel. Okay. So let me take a look what's going on here. And let me see some application as well. So we got the second command, and it looks that way that the first command actually created a channel and created some organizations and some peers and some certificate authorities. But what we want to do is to basically have some Java application on top. So the next command, what I'm gonna execute, says that there's a deploy chain code, deploy something to my channel, and I can put a language, minus language Java. So if I just execute this command, then what's happening is that there's an example Java application, which is configured under test network. I will show just in a second. And this example Java application will be installed. So I hope it's still working. Anyway, this is Friday the 13th. So I mean, I would expect that something goes wrong with my demonstration. So I hope everything is still working. So it looks great. So it looks great. So what basically happened, if you go to the Fabric samples folder, there's basically a chain code folder. And in the chain code folder, you see several demos. One demo is this FabCar demo. And yeah, there's no hint for that. But basically, when you did this command, basically this FabCar demo was installed. So under this FabCar, you find this chain code in several languages, and one is Java. So basically, this Java application was installed. Anyway, what we can do, I will do it in a little bit more advanced way before showing the example. So if you want to do practically, if you want to develop a new Java chain code in a very easy and fast way, what you can do is just to go to this folder, copy this folder, like saying this is gonna be my FabCar. And then play with it a little bit. Again, so basic idea basically is that the easiest way of doing something is to have something which is working and modifying a little bit. So that's what I basically did. And I will show this FabCar demo in a second. So what was installed is basically something which is a very simple Fabric car example. What you can do, you can have like different models of cars. You can write these cars into the ledger with the create car command. And you can query all cars from the ledger with the query all cars command. And you can have some smaller transactions as well, like changing the car owner, and I think that's all. So basically, this FabCar demo, without going very much deep into the code, have 3 transactions. You can create a new car, you can query all possible cars, and what you can do is you can change the car owner, basically. Okay, so that's a very simple 3 transaction demonstration. So as this was practically installed, we get some magic here how this chain code was installed. But what you see at the end, that we executed a query on the installed chain code, and this query was query all cars. And basically what you see here at the end, all cars were queried. These are the cars in the system. Okay. So what can you do with this? Unfortunately, there's no nice way of doing something with this car example. One way of playing is with that is that it looks that way, that you can use your command prompt to work a little bit with this example, with this installed car example. And what you have to do, unfortunately, is to configure your environment variables. Again, this is a permissioned ledger, so basically you need to have some permissions to work with the network. It looks that way, that in this very simple examples, all of your stuffs have been generated. So basically, you can find all of the so-called crypto stuffs and X509 certificates. I will just put it in a GitHub repo. But anyway, if you configure in a correct way your environment variables, I mean, especially what's important is that you have these certificates, the certificates showing your client identity with which you communicate with the network. So it means that you are allowed to communicate with the network at all. So if everything cool, what you can do is to test your application with the help of a command prompt. And it looks that way. If you install Hyperledger Fabric, you get a couple of commands, like two most important commands are peer chain code query and peer chain code invoke. One practically queries your ledger, queries your application, and the second one executes a transaction. Okay, it's very, very simple. I mean, not so simple, but from not so simple to get it alive, but from a conceptual perspective, it's not so complicated. So what's happening here is that I will just try to query my ledger. And what I did, again, after setting, of course, my environment variables, I just executed the query all cars command, which queried actually all of the possible cars in the network. So after having that, I can query actually. There's one more command. It says query one car. So if I want to just play with the network, I can query one car as well. It looks that way, that there's a query car, and there's an ID. It's like car 11 is my car, which I'm gonna query. And if I do it, there's an error that basically this car 11 doesn't exist. Okay. So it's actually not a malfunctioning, but it's something which should be known, or which should work. So what I can do is that I can try to invoke a transaction that practically writes in one such a car. So it looks actually a little bit more complicated. But what I'm doing is, from a command prompt, I call a peer chain code invoke transaction. And this transaction calls basically a create car. So it's a create car transaction. And this create car transaction has got a couple of arguments. So like this car will be car 11. This is like a primary key for my car that caused actually an error previously. And then I don't know, I'm pretty much, East European. So let's have this Trabant. Not quite sure if you guys know it. Let's have this, I don't know, blue. And I don't know which is this last argument. So these are like characteristics of the car. It's like XXX. So as soon as I have this transaction and execute this transaction, I can see that I have a chain code execution which was successful. And as soon as I repeat my previous peer chain code query command for car 11, then I should basically get back the result that I just wrote into the system. So it's like that's the result. It's owner, that was the owner, that was the model was leaf anyway, color was blue, and then make was basically Trabant. And yeah, and this looks nice. So this is the answer. I wrote in something to the ledger, and this information is really there. Okay. So let's get some more fun. So again, the easiest way is to start is that practically you go to Fabric samples chaincode. You get Fabcar, you get Java, and you just copy this application. So that's what I did basically. And the point is here, this is a Java application. The logic is not so complicated. I will show it basically in a second. What's important is, I mean, one thing is that it's sometimes just difficult to get everything from scratch, is because it's a Java Gradle project. And then you need to have exactly the proposed Gradle settings, which is sometimes not very much documented. So like one way of really getting this alive is that you just download your Hyperledger Fabric version, which gives your Fabric samples. And then if under your Fabric samples, you go to chaincode and you find one Java examples, that must be working, and that must be having the right Gradle settings. Okay. So after I go to car and I take a look a little bit in the code, and I think I'm having a slide. So after this brief, that wasn't an introduction, it was a little bit more, but let me take a look. How do you program actually your chaincode, your smart contract? So I prepared practically one slide. And so basically Hyperledger Fabric consensus is a little bit more complicated. Not quite sure if you aware that. Probably we won't have much time to go into the details, but the point is, from a chaincode perspective, is not so complicated. So on the one hand, what you have, you get your client application, which has basically the SDK, or we can say it's actually gateway as well, that sends transaction basically for you. So if I just go back to my command prompt, so like this peer chaincode invoke was a transaction that I sent into the ledger. It was not by a real client application, but just by a command prompt, but basically that's the same. And actually, query is a special transaction as well, which doesn't cause something a state change, but anyway, it can be regarded as a transaction as well. So I send these transactions to my chaincode, and in my chaincode, the names of the contracts, the names and contracts and the transactions, so which transaction should be executed for a transaction call, is handled by decorators. We got like two major decorator. One is transaction, and the second one is contract. So if you just take a look on this Fabcar demo, we see basically a Fabcar demo, Fabcar Java object. And this Fabcar object is our main contract basically. And it looks that way, so this is basically a pretty simple Java object, which implements a contract interface. But what's more important is that the fact that this is basically a smart contract in a chaincode is administrated in a way that we got a couple of decorators. And one such a decorator is like contract. It's so let me put it that way. Basically, you get, so the idea is pretty similar actually to the Fabric Composer. You shouldn't have something as smart contracts or contract here, because basically what you have is transaction. But contract is something which groups a couple of transactions. It can be built up in a much better way with the help of a Java object as well. And well, I would say, so basically there's contract because, I mean, in the world there's like smart contracts. So it's like a more fancy way of programming blockchain and saying anything on blockchain. So it's not necessary from a logical point of view that you have contract, but basically, so you get already here contracts as well. So this is one contract. It means this is a Java object that provides input for your transactions. Okay, and you get a lot of meta information. It's like Fabcar contract, who's did that, and so on and so on. You got one more decorator before your class, and this is default. Default means that basically, so this object, I mean, the services, the transactions of this object can be called without giving the name of the class. I will show in a couple of seconds an example for that. And what's more important is you got something as transaction. So you got like function calls, and before your function calls, you get a decorator called transaction. So if you have this transaction before your function call, then basically the system will know that if you call your transaction from a client application like query call, or the other one was here a create new call. Not quite sure. This is somewhere my create new call core. This is the create core. So if you call this transaction from a client application, and if you have a Java object installed that has the decorator of on the one hand contract, on the other hand transaction, then basically the function after your transaction will be called. Okay, I think it's pretty straightforward. So for instance, we got here in this code the query car implementation. It's again a simple Java method in an object which has the transaction decorator before. You find like the create car here as well. It's again a simple call basically with a transaction decorator. There are two specialties here and worth mentioning. You get usually a special transaction called init ledger, and init ledger looks that way. So what you have here is that your chain code is running in this container, but from a physical point of view. But as you install your chain code, it doesn't start automatically. So what you need to have is to have some special transaction which is mapped into this init ledger call. And this, after calling this init ledger, practically there's gonna be a service object from your chain code, so it will be initialized. From a programming point of view, what you can do is to give some really initialization after this function. So after calling init ledger, basically what we do is that we pre-populate here a couple of data, a couple of different cars. Pretty simple. Okay. So basically, this is the programming model. We get the client, transactions are coming in. In your chain code, you need to have some contracts and some transaction decorators. And as soon as you have it, basically, the incoming transactions are redirected to your code. So that's one thing. There's a second part of your chain code. And the question is, of course, okay, I mean, I get the transaction, I get my code. So what do I do with my code? And what you do is your code is again not too complicated. There are atomic ledger operations. Atomic ledger operations are put state, get state, and delete state. So what you can do, basically, you can put something in the ledger. You can read out something from the ledger, and practically you can delete a state from your ledger. Certainly, I say deleting. You don't delete anything from the ledger. It looks that way. The delete state deletes that just something from the word state. So I mean the historical values will be accessible. So what I do basically as a chain code programmer, I program a couple of transactions, and these transactions will write something to the ledger, read out something from the ledger, or delete something from the ledger practically. And I give some logics in the middle. So that's basically Hyperledger Fabric Chaincode programming. So let me take a look how this FabCar example looks that way. So this is like one example as I mentioned. This is the create car transaction. I get a decorator at the beginning. So basically the system recognizes that this is really a create car transaction. What's important is that at the beginning, I have something as a context. And so with the help of the context, I got practically access for the Hyperledger Fabric functionalities. So I get a stub, and with the help of the stub, I can get state, put state, or delete state. Okay, so this is practically the reference for the Hyperledger Fabric functionalities. The rest is parameter. So what you see here, if you still remember, I created a car. You find basically a key. I mean, that's the ID for your car. You have something as a make, model, color, and owner of your car. These are just custom examples, custom parameters that are presented here. Okay, so basically what's happening here, that for the first run, I have a stub, and this stub again is, with the help of a context, is a kind of an access for your Hyperledger Fabric environment. So what's happening is, for the first run, I try to read out the state of this key, and reading of the state of this key means that I try to read out the information from the ledger for this key, for this given key. And why is it important? It's because it's a create car transaction. So I mean, this logic looks that way, that basically I try to create the information. If I don't find this information, I throw basically, I mean, if I don't find this information, that's good, because that's a good create car. Otherwise, if I find this information, I throw an error message. So that's what's happening here. And then if there's no error, the second part is basically creating a new car. It looks that way, that what I do is I create a car object. A car object is basically something which has these properties, these parameters. And what I do is I do a put state. It's a put string state, where I have a key, and for this certain key, I put the serialized object into the ledger. So going a little bit more into the ledger, what's happening on the ledger side. So basically, this is how your ledger generally looks like. It looks that way, that you get blocks. In your blocks, you have the headers, and it's, of course, it's connected with like cryptographic hash pointers. But basically, the content of your ledger is practically key values. So here I get something as an identity 1 with some value 1. I get some identity 2, it's again a key, we can call it as key 2 as well, with some value 2 as well. I get some identity 3 with some value 3 as well. And basically the evolution of the ledger is the evolution of these key value pairs. So as you see here in the next block, I get a new value for ID 1, for ID 2, and for ID 3. This should be ID 3 anyway. And then in the next block, I get again a new value for ID 1, ID 2, and ID 3 as well. So this is the ledger, but from a practical point of view, what you have here basically is that you don't just store simple ID and value pairs, but what you store is basically kind of a serialized object. So what I have here is not a simple value, but it's something which is a more complicated business object, like a car. And I serialize this car to JSON, and I write it to the ledger. So going back to this example, what you basically see here as a create car transaction is that I create a new car, which is a simple object actually. So you can see that going to the car, this is a pretty simple object, which has some serialization hints somehow in between. And what you do is basically, I just create one new car object, and I just serialize this car object, and I just write into the ledger after the key of the car, this serialized object. So pretty simple. Okay. So basically, that's what you do from a chain code development perspective. There are some other operations as well, but that's what you use normally. Generally, you just try to do some transactions. I mean, pretty similar as in Hyperledger Composer, for instance. You just model some transactions. You write your object in Java with contracts and transaction decorators, having these transactions as functions, and you implement some logic, and basically at the end of the day, you use something as writing into the state, I mean, writing into the ledger, reading out from the ledger, and deleting something from the ledger, basically. And usually what you do, you do not use like atomic operators, but basically what you do is that you use something as a complex object that you serialize in a JSON, and you write this serialized JSON object to the ledger and read out from the ledger. And basically that's all chain code development. That's all chain code development independently from the languages as well. But that's chain code development, for instance, in Java as well. So let me just try an example. What I did basically here, this is already not the original fab car, but I extended a little bit with a very simple example. And as you see here, so this is my major contract. It has the contract and the default basically decorator as well. I just extended with two transactions. And again, these two transactions are just two Java functions for the object having this transaction decorator. And the first transaction is set practically a hello message. It looks that way, that the first argument is my context, in which I find all of the Hyperledger Fabric functionalities, and I get one parameter that's basically the message. So what I do, I'm getting this stub for the first run, which implements practically this state functionality for the ledger, and very simple, I do a put string state. So practically for a given key, I just hard-coded this key, I think. I put this information into the ledger. And I get a second transaction. It's again nothing special. It's the hello from chain code, which does exactly the same, just reading out this piece of information from the ledger with the help of a get string state. Okay, and returns it for me. So this is a very simple extension of FabCar. So let's see how we can practically install and test this very simple functionality. So what I need to do is that for the first run, I can stop my network. It's not necessary that I stop, but basically, let me show that as well. So I can stop the network. It's again with the help of Fabric samples test network, and there's a test network script, and then simple down. It closes basically all of my Docker objects, and it's doing. I think I'm gonna have some errors. So basically, it brings down your network and it deletes your crypto material as well. That is required for authentication, but that will be newly generated actually at the new start. So what I have to do, unfortunately, so again, the easiest way of doing things is to hack a little bit something which is already working. So you can install your new chain code actually from scratch. I probably have some hints for that, but the easiest way is to install your new chain code is to just to hack a little bit your scripts. And it looks that way. If I go to the Fabric samples, I find this network.sh as well. But what I have basically is a deploy cc.sh file. And in this file, it's pretty easy to find the code fragment that installs the Java application. Okay, so it's a general script that installs that can install JavaScript, Go, and Java as well. But if you go to Java, you can very easily find basically from which source is your application practically installed. So what I'm gonna do here, what I did just for easy start, I copied this FabCar project, I mean, especially the Java part of your FabCar project. And I created a new folder called my code. And under my code, I copied for the first run exactly the same Java project. And on the other hand, I just extended with a couple of things. Okay. So what I want to do is that I want to install that stuff and not the default application. So you find here two folders, two paths for this Java part. So what I'm just commenting in and commenting out. So basically what I do is that I will not install the FabCar Java example, but I will install my code Java example. And again, here under chain code, my code Java, that's gonna be installed. So as soon as I have it, let me just bring up the network in. So I'm just starting the network. It takes a while actually, but it's not so bad. I mean, this part generates the crypto material. It brings up actually your components, your Docker components. It creates the channel. That's an Anchor peer update. It's a little bit like Matrix, you know. I mean, you have to find a bug in your log file. So I have this. So the next stuff that I'm going to do is to install the Java application. Again, what I did, it's not going to be anymore exactly the same built-in example Java application, but I just made a new reference basically to my modified application. So with this, I will bring up my special application. So it again takes a little bit. But what's happening is this is the install process for the chain code in the peer, and so it looks pretty much the same because I just extended the code a little bit. But if we just scroll up, I think somewhere it can be seen that basically not the original application was used, but my modified one. Here you can, for instance, see that actually this my code was used, which is again pretty much the same as FabCar. Unfortunately, in the script we have some tests as well, like at the end, that focuses on this FabCar example. So if I just restructure it, reorganize it very strongly, then I might get some errors. But so the installation is a success. So what I'm gonna try is that take a look if these two transactions that I wrote in, which is practically a hello from Chaincode and the set hello message, is working. And I do it similarly as previous. So basically I have like two commands in the command prompt that are pre-configured. And one is a very simple hello from Chaincode. I think this should be Chaincode. Let's see if it works. So let's see if it works. So let me just take a look and try to give something. So it says basically that this contract method is not to be found. And the reason is that I can't really spell. So this should be a hello from Chaincode, but for some reasons I wrote it hello from Chaincode, which might be funny, but anyway. So let me just repair it. And then if I save it's supposed to be a hello from Chaincode, it gives back nothing. And the reason is for that is simple. It's because there's nothing configured. Anyway, if you like call a function, a transaction, which is not defined, you get this error message, which is, I mean, pretty good at this moment that we got that. So let me just try it out and write something to the ledger. It's again basically giving a transaction from a command line. And again, so this is a peer Chaincode invoke command. With that, we can just initiate transaction. And what I'm just doing is that I'm calling the set hello message command with some arguments called hello, new hello message. So what should be happening in this says is that this Java function called set hello message should be called with the context with the new error message. Based on the context, I get a stub. Based on the stub, I have the put state functionality that for a certain, this is a static key, puts into the ledger this new message. So let's take a look if it's working. It looks great. So it was successful. And then if I just have again my query, which is again basically it's called transaction. It's not a real transaction, but it's it requires this transaction decorator. And basically, based on this transaction decorator, the hello Chaincode function is called, which basically gets the context. Based on the context, I get a stub. Based on this stub, I can read out a state from the ledger for this statically coded key hello ID. And I just give back this hello message. And this is the hello message. So if I just run that, basically, I have my new hello message at the end. So I think I'm having a lot of material still, but perhaps I'm not quite sure if I want to go very much into the details at the moment. So I would say I would just stop here, and then if there's any questions, then I'm happy to answer a little bit more in details regarding generally for Hyperledger Fabric Chaincode development. So one way of doing this is that I stop sharing and I take a look if there's question in the yeah, so there's one question actually of it's a guidance for a Genesis block. And unfortunately, it's not so simple, but let me just take a look at actually at the YouTube channel as well. Yeah, so there's one question actually of it's a guidance for a Genesis blog. And unfortunately, it's not so simple, but let me just take a look at actually at the YouTube channel as well. So then let me just try to answer the questions. Yeah, so there's one question actually of it's a guidance for a Genesis blog. And I'm not quite sure how I can handle basically parallel YouTube as well. So if you have any question, it's easier for me if you just drop into this Zoom. But anyway, there's one question if there's a possibility to install Hyperledger Fabric on Mac. Honestly, I don't know, but I think it should be possible. What you need to install Docker. So if you can run Docker and Docker Compose, then it should run. Actually, I think it might. So I'm not quite sure how much memory you have. Perhaps, so I'm not quite sure if like 4 gig is enough. But if you have like 8 gig RAM, then you can easily install basically Hyperledger Fabric. If you supposing that you can install Docker and Docker Compose and both components are running, but I think that should be possible. Then the question is actually for Genesis. That was the Genesis transaction. So then let me share my screen again. And let me just try to give a little bit more details what's happening here. So so the best idea actually is not to go so much into the details into like Genesis block and stuff like that. But the point is that this test network, what you see here, has a lot of configuration basically. So if you build up your own Hyperledger Fabric, then these are the stuff that you do it manually, and you need to know how to do it. So it's not so easy. You get here something as a Docker. So like all of your Docker components that I've shown are here. So here you can like that. This is like your certificate authority organization 1, your certification authority organization 2, your certification authority orderer. You get here like your coach DB. I didn't mention DB. It's that way that if you store the state of your ledger, then there are 2 ways. One is the level DB, which is hidden in your peer, and there's a coach DB possibility as well. If you use coach DB, you have something as an extended key for your system. These are your peers as well. And in these folders, you find a lot of other stuffs as well. So one is at creating your ledger. There's 2 things. One is creating your crypto material, and the second one is having your different configurations. And not quite sure where your script for, I think this create channel transaction should be. Not quite sure. I find it, yes. So the thing is the following. It looks that way that based on your crypto material and different configurations, you can create your channel configuration that actually includes your Genesis file. There's actually more than one such a, I think there's more than one such a channel configuration because you have one for as a system channel for your ordering service, and you can find one for your channel as well. But I've never gone very much deep into the detail how this stuff looks like. The point is that you have something as a tool So if you don't want to use this whole scripting, then you need to basically use a tool which is config transaction generation. This config takes the gen, and this will be installed practically as a binary as you install Hyperledger Fabric. And with the help of this tool, you can create your Genesis block. I mean, it's again your whole channel configuration, which includes both your Genesis block and some other configurations as well. And you can set some of the properties of your Genesis block. So like if you say like here's a profile to our organization channel, then there's a configuration file which I think this config transaction.yaml, and with the help of this file, this gives the parameterization of your channel configuration and of your Genesis file as well. So like this configuration file has a lot of details, but basically what you can do is that I didn't mention in details, but it looks that way. If you just take a look on the physical Fabric architecture, that like you get several peers, several chain code components. So what you can, for instance, configure that when do you regard your transaction as valid? And you can have these so-called endorsement policies. Endorsement policies like I send my transaction to the chain code, and basically in all these components running my Java code, and I regard as a valid transaction if all of the chain code Java code says exactly the same or has exactly the same result, same output. And if one of these chain code components doesn't give me the same answer, the same result as the other one, then I don't accept this kind of a transaction. So it's something which can be configured. It says the endorsement policy, and for instance, such an endorsement policy can be configured with the help of this config transaction.yaml. And for instance, this is such an information which can be written into your Genesis file with the help of this, where was it again? With the help of this config txgen command, which refers to this file, especially a part of this file, and this is like the to-work channel. So this is like here the channel configuration, including your Genesis file for your channel, and there should be somewhere for the organization as well, I think. Not quite sure where it is. And if you have it, your channel configuration will be practically created. So here's your this is probably your Genesis block, and this is probably your, not quite sure if it's your channel configuration, but basically these are the so-called artifacts that are generated based on I mean, that are required actually for starting your channel and you're starting your farm, and including your Genesis block as well. I think you can even look into the details with some special encoding as well. So I'm not quite sure if I answered this question. It's something which is very much deep technical. So if it is not necessary, or I mean, one thing is if you need your own production-ready Hyperledger Fabric environment, then you need to make some consideration on your Genesis block, on your peers, on your organizations, and so on and so on. So in this sense, you have to rewrite here almost everything or do everything from scratch. But if you just want to make some development or especially some experimentation with Java chaincode in Hyperledger Fabric, then the easiest way is not to carry about, just use practically and modify a little bit these examples. So I'm not quite sure if I answered the question. I hope it was a little bit more detailed than expected. So it's again such a topic. From that I could do like again 1.5 hour presentation alone. So is there any other question? Let me just start again and take a look again in the YouTube channel. From that, I could do like yeah. So there's one thing. What do you think the best is to understand the code of Fabric? I'm not quite sure which code do you think. So if you like mean basically the the chain code. The chain code is not so complicated. If you want to understand the chain code, the best way is as I showed basically, just copy the fabcar, just playing with that, and just start to extend a little bit. So again, what I did basically is that I extended with some extra functionalities. I showed just one example for hello from chain code. But basically you can instead like wheels and wheel service and so on and so on. That's the best way. If you want to understand the middle, so not the development part, but the containerized infrastructure side, so all of these scripts that I shown, then it's more complicated. So you need to have a lot of DevOps and containerized infrastructure experience. And then basically the best way is perhaps not to start here, but really to try to do your own infrastructure, either from these scripts or from some examples from the web, and then do it your infrastructure and then read through everything that you find practically as a Hyperledger Fabric documentation and so on and so on. So from a conceptual perspective, doing like chain code development and doing like client-side development in Hyperledger Fabric is easy. What's more complicated is to deal with the whole infrastructure. That's tough in Hyperledger Fabric. So if you just want to develop in chain code, that's the best way. If you want to set up your own productive ready infrastructure, that's gonna be a fight. So I can show some external client application as well. There's one question here about. So let me just show it. Somehow I do not have the best practice of taking a look in the YouTube channel and Zoom parallelly, but I try to do my best. So basically, if you want to use a client application and not just the command prompt, what you can do again is that you can basically start with the Fabric samples. And in Fabric samples, there's a Fabcar folder. And in the Fabcar, you find client applications. So one folder is here, Java. And if you open this Fabcar, or if you just copy it and open it again, I think I copied it and opened it again as my code, then what you basically find is an example for a client application. And this is again a client application. This is a Java application. The easiest way is to start with a client Java application is to take a look in the Fabric samples because it's not really, I think it's Maven already, but it has for you basically the basic structure. So like which Maven repository you need and so on and so on. And this example has like three, let me just, I have one slide about this one as well. So if you want to access Hyperledger Fabric from a client side, what you need is a client application that has this SDK. And in Fabric 2, there's a new so-called gateway that makes you more easier to access your Hyperledger Fabric. I mean, in the original versions, like 1 year ago, it was pretty complicated to program everything. But at the moment, there's something as a gateway, which makes you really easy to reach your whole Hyperledger Fabric network. Basically, it has like 3 components. It has something which is your network description. Your network description looks that way, that basically that's a JSON file from your whole architecture. So like describing the peers, the organizations, the ordering service, and so on. It can be realized in 2 ways. One is static, and the second one is more dynamic. If you choose static, then you need to write practically your all configuration in details. So like, how many peers do you have? Where are the peers? Where are your organization? Where's your ordering service? How you can access your ordering service, and so on and so on. You can use dynamic as well. If it's dynamic, as far as I know, it's enough to write less as your configuration. It's because there's a so-called discovery service, and then discovery service practically informs your client on infrastructure changes as well, and on gives some information how your Hyperledger Fabric infrastructure look like. So this is a cool feature actually, because less problem for developers. So you get something as a gateway, there's something as parameters, static or dynamic. And there's one big issue, actually one big thing that I was not very much talking about. There's an identity wallet on the client side as well. It looks that way again. This is practically a permission blockchain. So you need to be authorized somehow to access the network. And this is what you get here in your identity wallet. So basically here you store your identity certificate to communicate with the network. So if I just go back and take a look, this is my chain code. But basically this is my client application. So it looks that way. I got 3 very simple Java file. And the one is, I mean, the first 2 is practically getting this identity in your wallet. Okay, so if you see like enroll admin and register user, both are basically responsible just for getting this identity into your wallet. You find your wallet here as well. What I'm gonna do, I'm gonna delete these 2 identities. And then, I mean, without just going very much into the details, what you have to do, you have to, for the first one, getting an administrator enrollment. So if I just use it, I connect with the certificate authority, and I get 1X. This is an X509 certificate, including public and private keys, which is an administrator, kind of an administrator user. You can find it as an administrator user. And with this administrator user, I can register a user. This will be like a client-side user. And after that, with this client-side user, I'm going to use the network. So as soon as I have it, basically, what's happening is that there's an app-user.id, and app-user.id is basically, again, an X509 certificate, including private and public keys as well. And this is your identity. So this is your client-side identity that you want to use the network with or from. And as soon as you have both things, you get this client application. This client application looks that way. There's a very simple main command prompt application, so nothing fancy. But basically, you need to have like, or 2 things are configured here. One is the wallet. So basically, there's an information where you find these identities. And the second one is the network configuration. And the network configuration looks that way. It's pretty complicated and it's not even stored here, but it looks that way, that so basically there's a path, there's a connection minus org.jaml, which is generated automatically at setting up the network. So if you still remember, as I said, this setup network script, it's like network.sh, create channel, my channel, and so on. Then not just the Docker components were started, but basically something which is a connection description for the client has been generated as well. And it can be found somewhere. So I'm not quite sure if I find it, but there should be somewhere here. I think that should be under test network, organizations, peer organization. So if I just go to Fabric samples, test network, organizations, peer organizations, org1, what was the rest? And connection minus org. So this is the connection file basically. So you don't need to worry about, because in this example, it is generated automatically. But if you want to set up your network manually, it's something that you should configure. So it can be pretty stressy. As you see, it describes your client, your organization, some certificates, URLs, certificate authorities, and so on and so on. So that's what you need here for your Java client. And if you have it, you have some initialization for gateway. So again, gateway is the SDK with which you access the network. And if everything working, again, the programming is pretty simple. What you do is first you get your channel. That's my channel. Then you get your contract. That's your contract. And what you can do, there's like two commands. One is evaluate transaction, and the second one is submit transaction. So again, similarly as the command prompt, what you can send is you send an evaluate transaction for like calling the query all car function of your chain code. And what you can do is to submit transaction. And again, it's pretty much the same. It sends a transaction, which is a create car, and it has some more functionalities. So let me just comment out this part. And let me just run it. So as you see here, what's happening, I started with query all cars, and this was the query all cars command, and it runs okay. And after that, I had just one error. There was something. It says basically that car 10 doesn't exist. Not quite sure why I have car 10. I think it's like change or something. But like, let me just put it out and saying I just create a new car. So again, as you see, this is very simple. Just submit transaction and evaluate transaction cost. So I have my create car, like let me just 13, that we do not have any problem. Let me have just again query car 13, and basically just showing the result. So this is again the query all cars. And so there's not much, I don't write out anything by create car, but what you can see that the query car for car 13 gives back actually the stuff that I configured here. So basically, it looks great. I could have something here as a result of submit transaction as well. Not quite sure which object you get, but I'm sure there's possible to show something. But basically, it looks that way. I can show as well how it looks like with the extended functionality. So basically, what I'm doing here is that I extended with this hello message, the whole stuff. So what I'm gonna do is to basically submit one transaction. It's a transaction call for set hello message, and then the message is hello from Java client. And then I have something which is an evaluate transaction, which again, I just send to the ledger calling the hello from chaincode. And then basically I'm just showing the result. And let me just comment out the rest. So I think it's not gonna work because I will, but let me just take a look. So my cars are still here, and I think car 13 exists already. So my create car will give me practically an error, and it stops the whole application. But let me just give a shot. So this is the query all cars. And exactly, so we got an error message, and the error message says transaction returned with failure, car 13 already exists in simulation. So that was the create car here. So what I'm gonna do, I'm just increase this one by one, and let me just increase by one as well. And let me just take a look. So I get the query all cars. As you see, I get the query car as well. So this is query car. And I do not have result for the set hello message, but I have result for the practically the get hello message. And then it says that hello from Java client. So it is exactly the same stuff that I wrote here in the ledger here. So it looks well. Just to summarize a little bit. So again, as you see, basically, I mean, the programming part is not so difficult because what you need to have is you initialize your gateway, and then after that, you have a couple of calls practically for sending transactions and reading on something from the ledger. The difficult part is setting up your full infrastructure and having the correct parameters in your client application. That's what difficult, but for that, I would propose to start from an example that's working. And then this example is like here, like under FabCar and test network and your chain code in FabCar, all is working practically. So you have, like more fun of making development than like with scratching, than with setting up your whole Hyperledger Fabric from scratch. So I hope I answered this question as well. So let me just take a look again if there's any more question. Just starting again this YouTube. So there's like two questions. One is like, so how can I get better with writing chain codes? So yes. So this is not an easy way of making development. There's one initiative actually doing something as a Hyperledger Fabric like development environment that practically runs somehow in your IDE integrated development environment. It's, I don't know, microfabric or something similar is the name, but I'm not quite sure how far you get. I mean, how far these guys get this with this project. Until that point, I mean, I would propose this approach. So what you simply do is to download your Fabric samples and then set up everything. So be sure that everything is running, and then basically start from a working example, start from a working fab car, make some modification, be sure it works, and so on and so on. And after that, start some client, be sure it works, and so on. So that would be my best advice actually for the development part. It's not so nice at the moment as working with other let me put it that way, programming environments. But like, I mean, so my personal thing is, if you just, so like I do occasionally like Ethereum development as well, and so like Ethereum is again not so nice to develop, not so visible. It's not like, you know, I mean, like developing a fancy front end and then making something as a feedback right away. But again, so basically there's an initiative, I'm not quite sure the name, but I can take a look and then give it for you guys. An initiative that basically everything is working somehow in an integrated development environment, and then it gives much better development experience. So I'm not quite sure if I just skipped somebody or some questions. Yeah, so let me just know if I just missed some question. I think I pretty much answered that was. But anyway, if there's no more question, that's what I meant actually for today as Hyperledger Budapest technical session. I'm sure it was pretty much technical. I hope you could follow it. I try to do it in a very much step-by-step way. The point is basically that, so like, I like Java development, but basically Java development in Hyperledger Fabric is more or less the least documented stuff. So for these reasons, again, so best is just to take a look on the working practices. If you write like in Chaincode in Java, Go is the most documented way of doing it. And then for the client-side application, the best documentation is for JavaScript, basically. But again, it's manageable in Java as well. So if there's no more question, then I would basically just stop here. And then again, so this is Hyperledger Budapest. We try to do meetings regularly, like in 2 months, not just technical sessions, but perhaps some business topics as well, reaching some business audience. And if you just feel like, you know, I mean, making presentations or having some good topics in terms of Hyperledger products or even consortium blockchains, then just let me know, and then sure, I mean we can arrange some other presentations as well apart from me. So if there's no more questions, answers, then I would like you, thank you very much for the whole audience that you took part actually. I mean, even in Friday afternoon, even Friday on the 30th, and then surprisingly everything went very, very smoothly. So perhaps Friday the 13th is not so unlucky day, nevertheless. So anyway, thanks a lot for your attention, and then see you next time.